All right, what is up? Welcome in, GC Live. Brought to you, as always, by our good friend Clint Hammond, CMG Home Loans, ClintHammond.com, 803-422-6797, NMLS number 71597. Y'all know the drill by now. If you're in the market for a home, you're thinking about home ownership, whether it's first time or multiple times, whatever it may be, Clint is your guy for mortgages, not only in Columbia, but in everywhere in South Carolina and even beyond that. Hit up Clint, 803-422-6797. When me and my wife bought our house, Clint was our first call, helped walk us through the process, and he can do the exact same for you. Also, big time, huge Gamecock fan as well. So if you want to support other Gamecocks, he is your guy for that too. Probably a little bit of a shortened episode today, but we did want to hop on and give you the very latest on the transfer portal in terms of South Carolina's recruiting. And Chris, first of all, big picture for everybody who, maybe doesn't follow all the nuance, all the little specifics of everything. I guess we could kind of accurately say this window is starting to come to a close. South Carolina's starting class this week. You have kind of that ad drop date, which is coming up, I think, next week for South Carolina in terms of their actual classes. Of course, for schools that had bowl games that were later than the initial transfer portal window, most of them are now through that little 5-day post-bowl game window with a couple of exceptions. And for Carolina, really, it's down to maybe one target, I would say, at least one known target that we're still closely tracking. So for the most part, this section, this part of the transfer portal part of the year is pretty much winding down.
Yeah, it is winding down. Kind of crazy, Wes, when you think about it. A lot of activity, a lot of hits for South Carolina, some misses for South Carolina, and they have some needs to still meet, but one of those needs could still be met in the form of the one remaining target. And then, of course, you do have the spring transfer portal window as well. And that's always interesting to track, Wes, because, of course, Gamecocks are going to have the opportunity to go through spring ball. I think that's going to be really important to shaping the spring strategy, not to get too ahead of ourselves. But that window, when does that window actually open? Let's see. Do you have it off the top of your head, Wes?
I don't, but you keep talking and I'll pull it up because I know exactly where to find it.
Yeah, there you go. So when it does open, it's a 10-day window, and South Carolina's spring practice schedule, of course, has not been released. The spring game date has not been released, but odds are that window is going to fall somewhere right in the range of maybe in the middle of spring practice, maybe towards the end. So the staff may not have the complete full picture of what the roster, looks like, meaning their opinions on, hey, spring practice is totally in the books. This is what we've got to go get. Depending on when spring practice is and when that window is, I think I actually got it too, Wes, April 16th through the 25th of 2025, 10-day window. They're still going to have a little bit of data from spring, right? For instance, South Carolina is probably going to try to go out in the spring, if possible, and get another defensive tackle. South Carolina may look at the receiver position in the spring portal window. I think they will. Will they find the right fit? I think how they feel about the roster in the spring at a couple particular spots will ultimately shape, do we go swing big on a guy as more of a luxury, or this guy's too good to turn down, versus, hey, we absolutely really need to go get, another depth piece, or, someone who's starter caliber at a particular position. That's obviously getting way ahead of ourselves, but we do know, to bring it back to currently where we are on January 13th, there were some positions where the staff kept in mind, hey, we do have the spring portal window. Let's see how things go here, and seemed to be happy with some of the pickups between the recruiting class, high school and junior college, plus what they got in the portal during the winter window.
Yeah, and as far as this window is concerned, so other than CFP games, and really other than the CFP semifinal games, everybody else, everybody else should be through their 5-day window, actually. So really, unless you're a graduate or you are on, I guess, Penn State or Texas, then you you're in the portal, or you're sticking with your current team for now. Excuse me, at least in terms of the rules and how that works. So for now, it kind of is what it is in terms of anybody that's available. And let's dive in momentarily, Chris, to Brandon Ceesay. He is sort of the final guy we are tracking in terms of South Carolina, at least known guys. There's always a chance a guy just sort of pops up. We've learned that. So, but in terms of guys we're tracking, in terms of guys we're aware of, it is Brandon Ceesay right now. Of course, originally played his high school ball in Sumter, South Carolina, and then played the last 2 years at NC State. And last we have heard on this, Chris, I would sort of frame this up like, all right, there are some positive signs here for Carolina. They're definitely strongly in it, but also just kind of trying to get to the finish line. Still very fluid, not a done deal whatsoever. Wouldn't be completely comfortable. It's 2:00, 2:10 here as we are live, calling it one way or the other yet, but South Carolina is still very much working this one in terms of trying to get him in the boat.
Yeah, Wes, I think really 5, 6 schools probably still, maybe 7 schools still in the mix. I was given a list of about 5 schools last week by somebody familiar with this recruitment that, we're technically still in it. We're all 5 of those in the upper echelon? Probably not. South Carolina was one of those. Ole Miss was one of those. We know that Lane Kiffin visited Sumter, as he tweeted out, as he tends to do. He was in Sumter. That was for Brandon Ceesay. There were a couple of other programs. Heard some whispers of Missouri trying to get involved. We do know that Florida was scheduled to host him over the weekend. That apparently didn't happen, but the Gators have been in the mix. So several schools that have remained in the mix. It does seem like Ole Miss, would it be fair, Wes, to say Ole Miss maybe the biggest competition at this point for the Gamecocks? That's probably fair. The Florida visit not happening. That may take the Gators out of the equation. We know Georgia had a little bit of involvement at some point, but it does seem like a Gamecocks Rebels battle here. And look, for Ceesay, he's a Sumter guy. Coming out of high school, West didn't have a Gamecock offer, but seemed quite interested. If you followed his recruitment a little bit out of high school, always seemed like he had an affinity for the home state school. But it's a different time, right? It's a couple years later, different circumstances, a recruiting reset that comes with the portal. He's elevated his profile in terms of the number, the caliber, the quality of schools that have been chasing him. And of course, we know Ole Miss does good work on the portal front to be realistic with it. So we'll see where things go. South Carolina definitely still in it, and we're still tracking it, really up to the minute.
Yeah, and so we'll see what happens there. And, to an extent, man, Ole Miss has put so much emphasis on the portal. They almost have to do well in the portal or they don't keep winning, I think. So I do think there is a little bit of a give and take there when you're talking about how much emphasis do you put on high school recruiting? How much emphasis do you put on portal recruiting? Is it a mix? For Carolina, it's definitely been – they're definitely a program, don't get me wrong, that has relied heavily on the portal to try and take a step up in terms of where they are within the SEC, and we've seen that. Also, I don't think they ever want to get too far away from trying to base their foundation on the high school ranks. I feel like Ole Miss is a program right now, the way they are structured. You say, well, how do they keep spending all this money in the portal? How do they keep getting? Well, it's because they have to, and it's because they have starting jobs that are going to be available pretty much every year. It seems like via the portal, just as much roster churn and turnover as they have. So interesting as Carolina and Ole Miss kind of do butt heads on the portal quite a bit, it seems. And I know Carolina will want to win this one. And, if Carolina gets Ceesay, we'll dive into him a little bit more as a player. But off the bat here, Chris, I think this would be just a really nice addition to this secondary. When you look at, they return some guys, obviously. They return some guys that have played a bunch, that have played well. You've got to replace a Nick Emmanwori. And he's been I think he's almost been an underrated playmaker for this team. As crazy as that is to say, because he's been on all the lists. He gets in on so many plays. And I think bringing in a guy like Ceesay just opens up the door for you a little bit more to where you have a lot of options in the secondary. Do you leave Kilgore at nickelback? Do you potentially slide him back into a safety role and let all those sort of corner types fight it out for corner jobs and for the nickel job? Ceesay is someone who's played in the slot before and has played outside before. So I think there's a lot of things to keep an eye on there. The thing to sort it for me is just, do you have to have him? Obviously, probably not. But would it be a really nice luxury? Would it lessen your potential problem areas in the secondary just a little bit? I would sure say yes, because this guy fits what Carolina likes to be on defense very well, I think.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's sometimes you go into an off season and you say, look, we've got to get basically a starter at this position, or somebody who's going to really, really push for a starting job, or, hey, we need a starter and depth, or maybe we just need depth pieces. Carolina seemed to come into this portal offseason hoping to get one defensive back. That was kind of the target. But we do know always that if there are guys out there that make sense, that are, I like how you coin it, like a luxury pickup, that doesn't mean Carolina's going to take them and just sit them, right? Like, you take luxury guys because they're good, right? You want to add them to your program. What you might not have come into the offseason with a set need, right? At that spot. Maybe you're going above and beyond that number, but it makes too much sense to not take a guy. So for Ceesay, I'll go back. He's a Sumter native. He's from South Carolina. And he fits, like you said, Wes, what you want to do well. He could play nickel. He could play corner for you. He's played well, like seemed to take a step this past season at NC State, could play special teams for you, has some versatility to his game. And like you said, if you bring him in and you're already bringing Miles Norwood in from Ball State, could give you some luck, some, different combinations and a little bit more versatility on the back end. We know that Torian Gray likes versatility in his guys, and they want to pick the best five ultimately. So the Kilgore question is definitely an interesting one to me. Maybe if you get Ceesay, that weighs in to some degree to that equation and to that decision.
Yeah, we'll see what happens there, man. Obviously, check out Gamecock Central if you want. It's kind of like Chris was talking about, that minute-to-minute feel for where things are there. We'll certainly keep you updated and see where it goes. Let's talk about Devonte Miles, who is South Carolina's latest addition. This came on Saturday, I believe. Kind of was expected at the time. Carolina beats out Mississippi State, where he did take a visit, and Georgia, which he was potentially going to take a visit to. It was supposed to be Mississippi State, South Carolina, then Georgia. Gamecocks were able to kind of cut that off and get him pledged while on campus. And, this is a guy, Chris, I think, let's call it like we see it or call it like it is, was not quite as highly ranked on the transfer portal ranking websites, of course, On3 being one of those, as like a Terry Webb. However, I do think, and if you go to his Twitter, he's got a pinned video with some of his highlights. I kind of want to play it, but I don't know if we'll get dinged by the algorithm, because the algorithm it doesn't miss anything anymore. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
So if you want to go to, it's at Devonte Miles 90. He's got some tape from his time at Bowling Green. And I will say this, you can see what Carolina saw here, right? Like, he's got a nice frame, 6'5". We were talking about this earlier on the radio show. Is he 270? Is he 275? Is he 280? Carolina listed him at 6'5", 280 on their little graphic they put out when he officially signed with South Carolina. We're going to get an answer for you, by the way, on exactly how big he is. But, Chris, this is someone, you watch him move. he is light on his feet. He's got long arms. He's got the frame you're looking for. I can see why Carolina and Mississippi State and potentially Georgia, I can see why they saw the film and said, hey, that's a guy who looks like an SEC athlete.
Yeah, I did. We had the luxury of being able to see more easily some of his highlights, right? He's one of those guys that did post some highlights. Otherwise, Wes, you're going through and you're like sorting through Bowling Green games. I know you said earlier that you did that for RJ Newsome at Western Kentucky. There's no highlight reel, so you're doing it kind of manually. Devonte did us a solid and put up a highlight reel on his X account, and you can see it. No, he's not gonna. He wasn't as highly ranked out of high school as Gabe Brownlow-Dendy, who was a 5-star at A&M. He wasn't one of the bigger names in the portal, although he certainly had some Power 4 schools from the SEC and Big Ten pursuing him, hosting him on visits, etc. Interesting prospect in that he is a little, he may be a little bit, quote unquote, undersized. Even if he's 280, you're going, okay, defensive tackle 280. But Wes, last year, TJ Sanders listed at 285 for South Carolina. And if you look at TJ, he looks different than some of the other defensive tackles on South Carolina's roster, but he did pretty well for himself, at defensive tackle, particularly rushing the passer. When I look at Miles, and I'm not saying he's going to be as good as TJ Sanders, don't put those words in my mouth, but he is a guy who can move. He's got some quickness on the inside. He also got maybe a little bit of positional versatility because at Bowling Green, they played some 3-man front where they would put Miles basically at a kind of a 5 technique at an end position. And then he also played inside and 4-man front. So one of the questions we have going into next year, will Clayton White play a little bit more of the 3-man front that we saw at the end of the 2023 season? Maybe so. I don't know if we're sure of that yet. Either way, I think Miles probably projects as more of a guy that you can plug outside if you play some 3-man, or as a 3-technique defensive tackle that's probably not going to be a big run stuffing type, but is someone that can maybe give you some presence in pass rush situations on the interior.
Yeah, and I think with a lot of these guys, man, like you can see the potential. You can see the potential in him. You can see the potential in Brownlow-Dendy, and certainly you can see the potential in Xavier Hardy. And so now it's going to be about if you're Travion Robertson and you get these guys in here, how quickly can you get them ready? How much weight can a guy like Devonte Miles potentially add now that he is in an SEC strength and conditioning program? I mean, I think it's worth noting that you're going to have different resources. You're going to have more resources at a South Carolina, frankly, than you do at a Bowling Green. So does that factor into this a little bit? Can he just add a little bit of strength, a little bit of size to go along with that frame that you already see on there? I go back and I did not see some of these clips when he initially committed to South Carolina. But if you start looking around and going a little bit deeper on Twitter, you can see very easily why Brownlow-Dendy was a 5-star guy coming out. And, you can see that on the high school tape. There is huddle of that. But there's this guy, let's see, Carter Carrolls, who, let's see, he's with Texas A&M 24/7 site. He's got some just quick clips of Brownlow-Dendy from the times he did play at A&M. Didn't play a lot, but I mean, he flat, like he looks like, and hopefully y'all will know what I mean when I say this. He looks like a Texas A&M interior defensive lineman. Doesn't it seem like these guys have been just cloning?
That is a compliment when you say that. There was one year, Wes, where A&M played Carolina at Williams-Brice. Maybe the 22 game or the 2020 game. I can't remember which one. And, Texas A&M had one of those line changes. And the defensive lineman that ran in, I literally started laughing because he just looked like he was lab grown. I think it was Bobby Brown. I think he was as wide as he was tall, but just looked incredible. I mean, they've had some dudes. So yeah, I mean, Brownlow Dindy, man, out of high school. I mean, you're like a kid this big who can move like that, and it hasn't been put together yet. He's had a couple injuries at A&M, but there's something to work with there in terms of just like the size, movement, the overall talent.
Yeah, and again, we'll see what happens. Let's see what feedback we get. Let's see what we hear about the health, the strength and conditioning, spring ball, of course. We'll find out more. But I also would not be shocked at all if we start hearing little things about that guy. Like, dang, where did this? How did this guy end up leaving Texas A&M? Just because if you look at that size speed combination that you almost have to have if you're going to be a successful SEC interior lineman, I mean, he's got that in spades. So we'll see what that ends up looking like. Very curious. And again, I'm not saying in any way that the questions are answered on the interior defensive line. We're all going to find that out together. But you can start to see the pieces being put together about kind of what they could be as they look to replace a TJ Sanders or replace a Tonka, replace a Boogie, DeAndre Jules, all those guys that they're going to have to replace this year. Not going to be easy, but you can at least see what they're trying to do there in terms of those things. By the way, before we move any further, got to tell you guys about our friends over at Game Time. Hit them up with the Game Time app. Hit them up, gametime.co, not gametime.com, gametime.co. If you're in the market for tickets for an event, for a concert, for comedy shows, sporting events, of course, hit up our friends at Game Time. One of the best things about it, go ahead, toggle on this little spot on there where you can go ahead and have all-in pricing. That means you're not going to get those surprise fees when you get to the end and actually purchase whatever it is you're buying tickets for. You're going to know exactly what the cost is from the very beginning. Also, another great thing about Game Time is that you have a Game Time guarantee, and that means if you purchase a ticket somewhere for any event from Game Time, and then you find the same section later on a different ticketing app, they're going to credit you back 110% of the difference. So that's your Game Time guarantee there. Also, Game Time ticket coverage, Game Time guarantee. You'll always get the best price. If you have never used Game Time, download it today, create an account, use the code ON3. That is ON3. You'll get $20 off your first purchase, though terms do apply. Again, hit up our friends at Game Time. Chris, we'll see what happens next, right? I mean, I don't think, maybe you disagree, I don't think there are any surprises in store. I think it's kind of Ceesay or we'll see. However, you just never know, which is why we love this stuff.
Yeah. No, I do agree with you. Not any surprises. I can honestly say
from the portal.
We're not tracking us like we don't have this surprise that we're sitting here quietly tracking that may come up from the portal. If one comes up, it will be a true surprise. Maybe we'll get a heads up on it. But right now at 2:26 p.m. on January 13th, we don't have one. So the activity has waned, which was expected at this point, right? It's so late in the game. You've got, 12 transfers in the boat. You got 26 prospects from high school and junior college. So you're almost on you might end up with a 40-man class, Wes, in the 2025 cycle, which is kind of wild.
That is very wild. By the way, I was just reading Cedric Williams, former Gamecock offensive lineman and former Gamecock off the field coach, has just been named co-offensive coordinator and offensive line coach at where'd it go? I lost it. Florida A&M. So good for him. Also, our guy Seth Strickland.
Yep.
Moving up in the coaching world too, right? Did you see this, Chris?
Right. Yep. At Charleston Southern. He had been to Anderson University, right down the road from where I used to live, where I grew up, and is now at Charleston Southern. So congrats to Seth.
Yeah, OC and quarterbacks coach.
Yep.
Running the head ball coach's offense to an extent, I bet.
Also runs a mean cone drill, Wes, in summer camp.
That's a deep cut. That's a deep cut.
No doubt.
Seth used to have to work when Chris and I would be out there at the Muschamp camps back in the day. Seth would be out there working the cone drill and yelling at high school guys to cut the right way. So shout out to Seth, moving on up in the world. Great dude. Good football mind as well. I don't know, man. I don't know if I got anything else. What about you?
Nah, that's good, man. We knew this was going to be a little bit more of a shorty in terms of length. So we can come back on here when some other stuff happens and we'll talk about it then.
We do have a question from Ethan K. Let's hit this.
All right.
This is kind of interesting. Do Murphy and Johnson start at linebacker? And, I'll put this caveat, Ethan. This stuff could change 10 times between now and South Carolina versus Virginia Tech in Atlanta. So let's put that out there. I think Fred J.R. Johnson is going to be, if healthy, is going to start. I think that's about as solid of a projection as you could make this far out. He's going to have to learn, he's going to have to earn it. He's going to have to go do it. But I think you can make that projection. Past that, I think there's going to be a lot of guys fighting for snaps. If I had to go ahead and pick one now, I don't know if I would go with Murphy. I think, first of all, the staff has definitely not given up on Jaron Willis.
Yep.
So I think we've got to include that in any conversation on the linebackers.
Yep.
For me personally, I look at Justin O, and that's who I would pick as my favorite to start way, 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 way too far ahead of time.
Yeah, like a projection for sure.
Yes.
Makes sense. No, I'm with you. I see it to simplify it and to try not to dodge the question. I think it's J.R. Johnson and a wild card, and Jaron Willis being here, having flashed in the past with potential, like Jaron would have played more in 2024 if not for some other factors like getting Demetrius Knight, who was really, really good, getting several other guys back who were returning starters and depth guys, right? He would have played more because he played at the end of 2023. So there's some talent there. He's now been in the system a couple years. This will be year 3 for him. I think don't forget about Jaron Willis. Some people would ask us about him every now and then during the season or even after the season, Wes. We've had a few questions on Jaron Willis. Definitely still someone that the staff is looking at and planning on giving, every opportunity for. I'm like you and very intrigued by Justin O's, potential. I think it's how quickly does he realize that? Is it enough before the season to where, okay, this is our guy? Is it in the middle of the season? Is it a little bit more down the road because he's still a young player? But man, the talent, size certainly appears to be there. But that will be one of the bigger questions, going into spring ball. What does the pecking order look like at linebacker?
Yeah, and what the pecking order might be on day one could easily not be the pecking order, down the road. They do tend to lean a little bit more on the guys who have been there and on the guys who are a little bit older, the veteran types, and then you kind of make the younger guys or the new guys earn their spots. But Justin O, the fact that he ran right out there as a true freshman at Alabama in their spring game, and granted, you're talking about, you're splitting the teams in two, but was a starter in their spring game. As someone who came in who was supposed to be high upside but raw, for him to go ahead and step in and make 11 tackles in their spring game at a place like Bama, I do think says something just about I don't know if it's just a natural instinct of the game of football or a quick learner or whatever it may be. That to me is a pretty positive sign for what he could be. And the fact that South Carolina, when this dude entered the portal, they instantly prioritized him and targeted him and wanted to go get him. So I think that says something about how high they are on Justin O. Let's see. Chris, do you want to answer that one? Had somebody ask where he went to high school?
Yeah, TL Hanna. Yep.
It's a TL Hanna guy. And Jake says, what is the goal of acquiring Air Noland? I still fully don't understand that move. Easy one. So when South Carolina lost Robbie Ashford, the need to go get a portal quarterback, I think, just flew to the roof, basically. I mean, I think they had – so they actually kicked around the idea of bringing in and tried to bring in 2 high school quarterbacks, and it didn't quite end up working out like that. And so you have Cutter, obviously. You have Dante Reno, obviously. But other than Sellers, that's your quarterback room in terms of scholarship guys. So they absolutely had to go get another quarterback. And bringing in someone like Air Noland, who was already a pretty developed passer as is out of high school, was a 5-star guy, and I think was in a position to start at some places right off the bat, or I think if he wanted to come in and play SEC ball and still sees himself playing in kind of a Big Ten or an SEC, come in, sit potentially for 1 year under Lenore Sellers, knowing that Sellers is NFL draft eligible next year, and then knowing if he gets banged up, you got a great shot to go in and be the guy. To me, it just makes a lot of sense. And it was hard enough to find a Robbie Ashford when Sellers had not already won the job this time last year. I think it was going to be near impossible to find another Robbie Ashford, knowing what we've all seen Sellers do at this point.
Yeah, that's the, if you're taking somebody for depth, it's a little bit of the reverse of last year, Wes. When you take a Davis Bevel or Robbie Ashford, now Robbie did come in with 2 years left, and he's going to go ultimately play that at a different school the final year. But, the ideal is to find somebody who's good enough to help you win, who also has some experience, who also doesn't have to be guaranteed the starting job in order to come to your school. And those 3 things are really hard to find. With Noland, is someone who's probably good enough to help you win. He was one of the most highly ranked quarterbacks in high school ball coming out of the 2024 class, but he doesn't have experience. That's the difference. Makes that part a little bit more of a question. But on the other side, to kind of counteract that, you now have him as kind of a little bit more seasoned freshman get, because he's gone through a year of high-level ball at Ohio State, and now you have him for multiple years. So you're not taking a guy saying, okay, this is a good stopgap, but we're only going to have him 1 year, maybe 2, and then we're going to be doing the same thing in the portal again, right? Now you've got a guy who you feel good about, who's got multiple years. The question, of course, is just, if you do have to put somebody in there, who's it going to be? The effectiveness is a little bit more in question just because you've got some guys who are not as experienced there. So there's always a trade-off with these things. But Beamer, Jake asked the question how good the pitch Beamer gave him was. A good pitch because he's here, right? But I think it's, Air was one of those guys that was fine with being developed, and waiting his turn. And even at quarterback, Wes, those guys do still exist sometimes, and he's one of them.
Yeah, that's another guy I'm very intrigued to get a look at, in the spring. And just, what I saw out of him from high school highlights, very, very impressive. And I know our guy, Charles Power, was very impressed with him, as was everybody kind of in the recruiting world, if you look at that ranking. So great get there for South Carolina. We will see if they can add Brandon Ceesay to the mix and kind of close out this window with another additional player. So, all right, y'all, appreciate you joining us as always. He is Chris Clark. I am Wes Mitchell. Hopefully some good stuff for you there today. I'm sure Jack and Kendall will be back on at some point later this week. And then if something happens, Chris and I will hop back on and talk a little bit more at some point later this week as well. So, all right, for Chris, I'm Wes. Appreciate y'all as always. Y'all have a good one.